Welcome to the Tiny House Ideas podcast. Okay, welcome to episode 3 of the Tiny House Ideas podcast. Today we've got a really exciting episode lined up for you. We're joined by Molly King. So as well as living in a tiny house, Molly is an author, she's an entrepreneur, she has her own podcast, and she's got so many other things that she explores. So we're going to be talking about how living in a tiny house has sort of allowed her to explore her creative ventures and to live life on her own terms, really. So if you're interested in hearing more about Molly and her creative and entrepreneurial ventures in her tiny house and how you can even apply that to your own life, then stay tuned. Welcome to the Tiny House Ideas podcast, the show where we talk about how to live a more fulfilling life with less. My name's Harry Alvarez-Garman, and I've got tons of exciting guests lined up for you, including authors, entrepreneurs, and tiny house owners. If you love minimalism, sustainable living, personal development, and everything in between, then you're in the right place. On the show, we'll be talking about how you can do more of what you love, how to turn your passion into a career, and how to live more sustainably.
Well, I'm Molly, and I'm so excited to be here. I am a tiny home, renter. I'm not a tiny home owner. So this will be kind of fun to talk about how that has been working out. And I've been in my tiny home for, just over a year and a half. And I love it. I've been quarantined here since March. And I still love it, which is great. I think
that is good.
Good test. Let an epidemic hit and then see if you still love the space you live in. So that's been super fun. You can see it behind me if you're watching on the video. So it's just under 200 square feet. I have a loft bedroom up here, another loft on this side that used to be my guest room. Now it's kind of turning into storage, but I call it the lounge. And so it's been an interesting evolution to see how the space has needed to kind of evolve as I evolve and as my needs evolve and different things that have come up, which I'm sure we can get into. But I'm totally sold on tiny home living at this point. I love it for this chapter of my life. And so it's a good thing.
Amazing. So you say you've sort of been in a tiny house for over a year now. Sort of sparked the interest for you? What sort of made you want to move tiny?
I think I was going back over this. I think it might have started even when I was a little kid. Yeah. There's a book series, I don't know if you've heard of it, called The Boxcar Children. And basically it's about these kids who find an abandoned train car and they turn it into their home /fort/ HQ for all their meetings and adventures. And I loved that concept. I had forts in the woods growing up. I was just always in the woods playing in different little areas. And I'm one of 5 kids. We lived in this house that had some little nooks, and I always found myself kind of going towards these little nooks, like the little hole under the stairs or the space behind the freezer, playing hide and seek. That was my go-to spot. So I love feeling cozy. I love feeling hugged by a small space. And even in my tiny home, there are little nooks that I've found even within my tiny space. So it was actually a couple years ago, 4 years ago now, I had a breakup and I was kind of figuring out what do I want to do next? And it's I remembered that I love tiny homes. And I already had a folder of tiny home ideas that I had collected prior to that. So I went back into it. And I started really researching, what would it take if I were mobile, if I weren't mobile? Would I need a gray water tank, a black water tank, whatever? How do I then dump it? How do I know where to stay? All this stuff. So I got really into it at that point, and I figured it all out, what I wanted. I started looking at different things, and then it just kind of fell through. I found a great house with 4 other people, so I was living there. And then I had this inspiration to move to Utah, which is where I am now. And I was like, man, I just want to live in a tiny home. That would be the coolest thing. And lo and behold, I went on Facebook Marketplace and this place was available for rent. And I was like, that's it. That's all I want. That's everything I want in a house. And I didn't know it, but they had been interviewing people for this space for months. There had been, I think, over 40 applicants. Wow. And through our conversation, how everything fit was just a complete inspired unfoldment of things. And really I got to move in.
So your creative space, tell me more about that. So obviously you've got a book published, you're working on your second book, you have a podcast, you obviously got your Instagram account, YouTube as well, everything. So talk to me about sort of what you've been doing to create stuff in your creative space.
I behind me, there's a list on my closet back here that has been kind of my quarantine list
Yeah,
of
to
all
get
the things. Yeah, ideally getting through all of these things. And there's still a few I haven't done. But thankfully, getting my taxes finished, getting my insurance like fixed. There were some problems with it. So like just some like adult stuff that I had to do. But at the same time,
yeah,
it's like, all right, it's time to finish my second book. It's been kind of in the works for the last couple years. And it really became so apparent to me that if everything is stripped away, including my dance career at this point, like all these things, if I still can't get this book done when I don't have the excuse anymore of I don't have time or, whatever the issue is, then it's not anyone's fault but my own. So that became very clear to me. And it's been so good. That's the sense of urgency now of just
mm,
wanting to do it well and to do it and feel that like closure
yeah,
is
exactly.
is really driving me forward. There's also a couple online programs that I'm pulling together. This process of going through our stuff. I've been doing this process. I wrote about it in my first book, but I call it my life editing weekend.
Okay.
And it's just this idea of like taking your physical space, picking a spot that you still haven't gotten to, the boxes still never got open from a move, or
Mm,
it's just an area we've been avoiding for whatever reason, and really setting the intention for 1 or 2 days, just like 2 3 hours of all right, let's handle it now. And at
yeah,
the same time, on the mental side, say what is the area of my mental house that I haven't quite gotten to, and what do I need to edit out so that everything can flow more cohesively and more smoothly. And
yeah,
so I just love that, having like a physical metaphor and then a mental side of it that we get to kind of bridge together. And as we
definitely.
clean out both of those, like I just did this with a bunch of stuff and I created a burn pile. So I'm going to take a bunch of these things and I'm burning, you know, past it's past pictures really, and like tokens from, anything I don't need. But a
Yeah,
lot of it too is burning these old beliefs that no longer are part of me. And yet, when I wrote them down, I realized I was still kind of operating with a few of them, in the background. And so I'm going to be writing those out again and then burning that and symbolically kind of cleaning out those beliefs, editing them out of my mental, you know, hard drive, if you will,
yeah,
and letting
exactly.
that kind of clear out that space so I have room to install the new beliefs that actually are true right now, not the
Yeah,
ones I created when I was like in high school or whatever. So yeah, those are things that are kind of taking up my plate right now, creating the program, finishing the book, things like that. And it's just nice to have kind of, there's nowhere I need to be. I have, very few obligations. I do have a few, but excuse me, it's been really nice to have the space and the time to go after these, even, excuse me, even as the world is kind of going crazy. It's one
yeah,
thing that I'm realizing is really grounding for me to have a purpose and to
yes,
work on
definitely.
these projects, even if it was
Yeah,
like a small craft project, like whatever it is, just having something to dive into, feel that accomplishment, feel that closure, and then, have that sense of like, okay, I accomplished something. I'm okay.
exactly, exactly. No, I know
Yeah,
exactly what you mean. And you speak about that idea from your first book. Your first book, for those that are listening, Don't Settle, Start Living a Life You Love. So you're sort of speaking about ways to make, oh, there we go, got it there as well for people that are watching on video. Amazing. So just want to sort of go over a few more key ideas from the book on sort of how you can, or advice for people that are listening, how you can sort of make time for what's more important for you, I guess.
totally. I just did a little post actually that, yeah, this is August, but this idea of really utilizing the solo time that we're given right now, especially for those of us who live alone during quarantine. I know it can be so, I guess, daunting to have that much alone time, and it's so tempting to just distract ourselves over and over again, which I fall into too, because I'm like, I don't want to think about the world, I don't want to think about all the heavy stuff, whatever. But I've realized too, over the last few months, I've stopped always having music in the background. Because I used to
Mm,
just like wake up, music, work, music, run, be on music, or podcast, whatever. Like always something external stimulating, even as I'm trying to do deep work. And I've realized recently, like somehow it started to fall away where I wake up and it's quiet. I go on a run and I don't have my earphones. I'm driving and I forget to turn on the radio. Like I'm starting to really relish this quiet for
Yeah.
the mere fact that it allows for a deeper thought to develop
Mm,
instead of
definitely.
always having something happening.
So much, so much stimulation nowadays as well, especially like you say, social media with your phone and everything. It's just nice to sort of escape and just sort of let your ideas just develop and just to see
Yeah.
where to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think time in nature is a big part of that, or a park, like whatever it is. That, and actually recently I went back to, I used to go to this all the time, but sensory deprivation tanks or float tanks. Have you ever done them?
No, I haven't, but I saw the other week you posted that you've sort of been to one recently. Yeah, I
It
would
was,
love to. Love to.
I'm sure they have some in London, or you're in London, right?
Near enough, yeah, near
Okay.
London.
Okay. Yeah, there's got to be some, and just for an hour, basically it's this like little pot of body temperature water. They put in a ton of Epsom salt so that you're actually floating. Like your body
Float.
won't go down
Yeah.
because the salt is there. And so the salt has its own like healing benefits, I'm sure. But having kind of the quiet, the darkness, you can wear a bathing suit or not, but basically you have nothing stimulating your skin because you're just floating. And it's kind of like once you close your eyes, you don't know where your body ends and where space begins. So it feels very much like you're floating in space, or just
Yeah.
like you're swimming in the infinite. And it's this
Mm,
beautiful experience where it's like I either bring a question to the pod and I like have my time to meditate on it, or I just sit and listen and like see what do I need to know right now? What is the thing that needs to come up for me right now? And I
yeah,
think that's a big part of giving ourselves that quiet space to really listen and
definitely.
get quiet and like find that peace, because I think we all have it, but we're so scared to face it sometimes, of like
Mm,
if it's actually quiet, like what else is going to come up, and I don't want to face myself. Like
exactly.
those are real feelings and I get there too. Yeah.
Mm,
And I just notice like the more I scroll on Instagram or whatever, like the more anxious I can get. And so it's like
mm,
calm down,
yeah,
remove those distractions, like get back to the core essence of who you are, because that doesn't change. And like anchor back in, like get back to your grounded, centered state. And when I
mm,
do that, I'm so much more clear on what I want to do, what I want to create, how I want to show up, and it just changes the whole game. Like I went
yeah.
on Sunday, and it's Thursday. I've had one of the most
So
productive weeks I've had. And I think a lot of it is because I gave myself that quiet time, to
exactly.
just get really clear.
Escape
So
for an hour. Yeah,
yeah. And it really like
that's
I talk about that in my first book, of just like why is it so important to have that quiet time, not just to get clear, but also to get to know yourself, and
mm,
just to like to some extent like start dating yourself so that you know who you are and know what you think and know what you
know
believe.
what
And
you
it's not, yeah, not from external like, oh well, I believe this because someone posted about it and I agree with them. It's like, why do I truly believe that in my own, in my own river of life? Like what is my rudder that I choose to help steer me, not because everyone else is going that direction, and really think through and like own each of my own convictions and values. So I think that's an important part of the process. And I don't know that a lot of people give themselves that time, because I still have to go through it too and like re up
mm,
myself sometimes and be like, all right, well, now I'm in my 30s. Like, what do I believe about these things now that I have a little
yeah,
more experience under my belt, So
mm,
it's a good
really.
practice. I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. Have you sort of found that you've been able to spend more time, like you were speaking earlier about sort of finding time for nature, finding time to sort of get out? Have you felt that being in a smaller space has sort of got you outside more, and it's sort of had you doing more things than before when you lived in a normal house?
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people doing van life or tiny home life are seeking, is like, well, if the bounds of my home are smaller, than my living room is the outdoors.
I love
And
that.
I know that's definitely like the dream for a lot of people, especially with van life. Like just go out in the desert. Like that is, let the dogs roam, let's go. I think that is true. And thankfully I live in this beautiful property where we have this like apple tree. We've strung some lights in the apple tree. We have some like a bean bag and some chairs, and it's just this like oasis in the middle of Salt Lake City that feels just so secluded. We have a little creek and there's chickens. Like it's our own thing and it's beautiful. When it hasn't been super hot, it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit here sometimes in the summer. It's been unbearable. But if you go up in the mountains, for each 1,000 feet that we climb, like 300 meters, it's another 10 degrees Fahrenheit drop. So like if I go out in nature on a hot day, I'm very motivated to get up and out, or get on my bike and go out. So yeah, I think I could do better in general, but it's definitely been a really nice balance when I'm feeling kind of frantic in my thought to go out in nature and be like, okay, deep breaths. It's going to be okay.
Exactly. I'm just going to give a quick mention to Tiny House Ideas. So Tiny House Ideas is my business, is my company. It's been what I've been working on for the last 5 years in the long term, and especially over lockdown, over the last year or so, I've really put some time, energy and effort into building this business. So Tiny House Ideas obviously started with an Instagram page, and it has grown and developed into the business that it is today. It's the perfect free platform for anyone interested in the tiny house movement, in the tiny house community. First of all of the images that I feature on Instagram, you can find out more information. You can get a full fact file over on the website. As well as that, there's a really cool tool called Find Me a Builder, where for free I will personally pair a few tiny house builders with you based on your requirements, and that will save you going through hours and hours of searching through Google results. Take the stress out of it for you, really. And obviously it's no obligation. I'll send you a few recommendations and it's up to you what you do with them. Another section of the website is the approved builders section. So I've been working with a few tiny house builders that I really stand behind, that I see the value in their work. So there's a profile there to sort of tell you more about them, and so you can contact them directly if you've got any jobs that you're interested in. And finally, on the website there's a section for tiny house vacations. So if you guys are looking to go away and to try the tiny house movement, to try the tiny house living, but don't know if you want to commit to it, if you don't want to live there just yet, then a vacation is a really, really great way to sort of get acclimatized, to learn more about it. And you can do that by clicking on the vacations tab of the Tiny House Ideas website and learning more and searching through some amazing holiday homes.
Yeah, sort of talking about sort of trying as many things as you can to sort of eventually find fulfillment. So what would you say to people listening? Would you have any advice for someone that's sort of stuck at a crossroads, that's looking to sort of find a way that they can live their dance, to find a way that they can sort of pursue what they want to do? What would you sort of say to those people?
One of the things that comes up a lot, I think, in these conversations are like, what if I have a lot of interests and I just don't know what to pick? Because so many people say like niche down, like pick one and go. And it's like, well, what if I don't know which one that is? I think that's totally valid. So instead of like just a fork in the road with a couple options, I was like, what if you have like a rake? You have a lot of options. I think one of the things, there's a man named Chris Gilbo who started the World Domination Summit in the States. He's been to every single country. I was at one of his book talks and got to ask him about this. And I was like, so yeah, what is your advice to people? And he had the whole audience there and he was like, all right, raise your hand if you have a lot of interests. And like everyone raises their hand. And he's like, okay, raise your hand if you're cool just picking one to work with for the rest of your life. And no one raised their, maybe like 2 people raised their hand. He's like, all right, so we're all, for the most part, wired this way. And it's totally okay. And the thing is, not all of your interests have to be moneymakers. I think that's a good distinction. Like there is kind of that beautiful sweet spot of something you enjoy or are challenged by and are curious about, and it makes money. Awesome. Like that's a good place to put those things. But sometimes if we burden our interests with trying to make it make money for us, it kind of kills the thing. Right. So there's like, I think we also need to have that honest conversation and say, what are these things that I enjoy having because it enriches my life? What I call kind of like a soul cultivator, and it just enriches your life. And what are the things that I would be willing to go into and face some challenges with in order to have that makes me some money and like create my life around that. So I think there's a difference. Like we can prioritize what category these things fall into. And even then there's a lot of insight, I think, when we look into who we are as little kids. When I've been going back through some of my older journals from when I was like 15, 16, it's like I already knew what I wanted and I just didn't realize it. So I found, a whole bunch of journals that were like, I think I might want to write a book someday. And then when I became an adult, I was like, maybe I want to write a book. But it was like I'd totally forgotten that whole side of me that enjoys that process, and whatever it was as a child that I was into, it's still valid. And so anyway, I talk about journaling a lot and how to take these ideas and find a way that works for you to process. For me, it's handwriting, journaling them out. For other people, it's talking it out, or whatever your process might be. But give yourself that space to just no holds barred. Let me pour everything on the page. Let me just do a mental download, spill it all out on the paper, and like anything goes. Let me just put it all out there instead of having to manage it up in my own head. When I get it down on paper, I can really see, like, do I actually like this, or do I like the look of it? Is it very Instagrammable, so I like it there? Or, and just have that real conversation of like, do I want this because everyone else thinks I should have it, or it looks really cool to other people? Or do I want it because it really fuels me? It really satisfies me. Like I love helping people, or I love teaching, like whatever it is, really have that honest conversation and spend some time with you figuring it out. So I talk about that in my Not Just a Fork, but a Rake in the Road chapter.
For those that are listening, obviously Molly's here on the Tiny House Ideas podcast, and we were speaking as well over message. And an hour after we finish this, we're going to have a quick break in between. Then I'll be coming on to the Live Your Dance podcast, and we were sort of saying as well, we had a laugh because going back to, you just mentioned Gary Vaynerchuk as well. We were sort of thinking, rather than do it on 2 separate days, let's batch it out, let's do it together, and then you're on my podcast, I'm on yours, helping each other out, and then obviously everyone that's listening to go and have a listen to that, to hear more about my story, to hear about
Absolutely.
the guests that you've had. I've spent some time today listening to the other guests you've had on the podcast, and it is really interesting. So everyone that's listening, sort of be sure to go and check that out as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited to get you on there and dive into your story too, because there's so much.
Another thing I wanted to speak about was traveling. You mentioned earlier the book talk that you went to, sort of traveling to so many different countries, and that's something you've done a lot yourself, isn't it? You've been to 50 countries or over, I believe. Is that it?
I think I'm at like 48, 49. Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing. Has that sort of influenced your decision to go tiny as well? Sort of traveling around the world, experiencing so many things, being outside, has that sort of had a factor in it?
Yeah, I'm sure it has. One of the things that, I think it's different too, like living in Europe, it seems a lot easier to like bad countries, as people have done. And there's an app where when I was living over in Spain and doing different travels, they're like, how many countries did you get this weekend? Like, it's not, I don't know. There's ways to do it that are better than others. And I don't count countries if I haven't gone outside of the airport. So that's one of my rules. I think one of the main things that I've found is that, like, my way of doing life is not the only way, and it's not the only valid way, for sure. And that's what I do love seeing, is like there's so many different ways to do the same thing. The French do their grocery shopping a little bit differently than people in Peru or in Indonesia or wherever. And it's so awesome to get to see, like, the people that you see around you in your country, wherever you are, it's just like the people in Kenya or in Malaysia. Like, we're all people just trying to do the best we can with what we have. And it really just, like, the humanity of the world is so vibrant when I travel. And it's easy because I'm just passing through, right? Like, I'm not having to deal with the corruption of a certain country's government or, all the issues that each country inevitably has. But I think it is so important to realize, like, how big our world is, how many people there are, and at the same side of it, how small it is, and how much we really do need each other, and how much, like, all this stuff, like, doesn't make life better. Like, just because most Western countries, we tend to have larger homes or more amenities and things like that, it doesn't mean we're happier. Like, some of the most happy people I found were subsistent farmers on an island in Peru. And they were super happy, like, at least from what I could tell, right? Like, who knows? Maybe I just saw what they wanted to show me. But at the same time, I was like, no, I think there's something deeper and more sustainable in their source of joy, because it wasn't coming from what they look like, what car they drove. They didn't have cars. If their nails were done or not, like all these things that we tend to, like, put up there on this pedestal. And it's like, honestly, it doesn't really matter. So what I do love is like being in a tiny home. It really keeps me like on, not necessarily on that same track, because I still like, I have a soda stream, I have a blender, like I have all these things that are, nice things. And I've thoughtfully chosen what I want in my home. And I think that's in itself should be more about how we design our spaces at home, now that especially we're at home so much more. But I was listening to a podcast where an architect was talking like, we used to just design homes around like the American ideal, like the family and the picket fence and the, dinner every night at the table with the kids and the whole thing. And it's like, the reality is we don't use a formal dining room much anymore. We don't have that ritual in our space, most people. So how about we take your life and design a home around your life?
Around that. Yeah.
And in my sense, I feel like tiny homes are more, geared on that page of like, all right, well, your life might be more outdoors. Your life might be not as expansive as you need it. And when you really boil it down, you're able to focus your energies and you're not like, having to do the yard all the time and clean the whole house. Like when I really get down to it, my house, if I really want to get into the nitty gritty, like it takes me an hour to clean it, but otherwise I set my timer for 20 minutes, turn on a good few songs, and I do like a quick blast, and then I'm done cleaning. So like it simplifies the life. And when you have a family and when there's other parts of this, like I think there's probably a way to do that too and still have thoughtfully done spaces. It doesn't have to be a tiny home, but it can be, like maybe we don't need all this stuff in this space. Like what if we just have a rocking chair, a couple books for the kids, the toy bin, and then open space. And like we don't have to fill it with a coffee table and a sofa and this and that, so like being okay, being different and not having it look like everyone else's magazine home. I think it's part of that. It's just being really thoughtful and intentional about how we live our lives, what those homes are. And when you go to other countries, they don't have a lot of that stuff, and yet doesn't stop them from living a full and satisfying, like, productive life. So I think there's a lot of good to be gained by looking at other countries, other homes, other styles of living. Even if like you're not totally into tiny homes, that's okay. I think there's a lot of qualities about tiny home living that are super valid, and I think we could all benefit from those.
So we've sort of spent some time this afternoon or the morning for you speaking about all of the benefits that you sort of experienced living tiny, all of the things you've been able to do. Has there sort of been anything that's stuck out to you as a negative, or something that's sort of not worked or not gone to plan, or sort of what would you change differently? Say you were to get a new tiny house, or you were to start afresh or rewind time a few years, what would you do differently moving into a new tiny house?
It would be awesome to have a flushing toilet and to have a washer dryer. These are things that I miss. Like when I go to other people's houses, I'm like, oh, your toilet flushes. Do you not know how awesome this is? And thankfully I have a neighbor who lets me use her bathroom sometimes, or like I can take a shower that's longer than 5 minutes with hot water or bath. Like I love baths. So I found other ways to do it. And I've done, laundromats are great. I'm so glad I've had one accessible. Sometimes I can use my neighbor's laundry, but it would be awesome to throw my laundry into my own space and just have it running in the background and like just pull it out and be in my own space. Like what a cool thing that would be. But in general, like not a big deal, but those would definitely be some creature comforts. And having a hot water tank that could do more than like 5-6 minutes of hot water would be awesome. But at the same time, knowing that I only have that much hot water makes me so much more efficient. I'm like, I can shower and shave and exfoliate all in 6 minutes. Yes. Exactly. Like that is great. So,
So what would you say to someone, obviously this is sort of that's what you'd change, that's what you've enjoyed. What advice would you give to someone that's sort of looking or debating about going tiny? What would you say to them?
I think it depends also, well, firstly on how someone makes decisions. So I'm someone who likes to research a lot. And the researching makes me feel better about my choices. There's other people who research to just perpetuate not making a decision, in which case I would just urge that kind of person to like, if you have an inkling and if you have the flexibility, just do it, try it on, or like go do an extended Airbnb visit to a tiny home and live in the Airbnb and really like picture yourself in the space, have the visceral experience of being in the tiny home to really see like, can I actually function in this small space? If I have a dog or a pet or, a pet or a kid or whatever, like, could we actually function? Like, try it on, find a way to get in the space. And before I actually got here, I agreed to live here without seeing it in real life. I'd seen pictures. But the woman who lives here, when we were on the phone, she's like, just so you know, it's like, it's really small. It's just think like it's a bedroom, but like a little bigger than a bedroom. And I was like, okay. So I had this like vision of what it was. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take that vision and like bring it down by, 50% and have a much smaller thought. So as I was packing my car in Colorado and getting rid of stuff, I was like, I got to be really like strict and get rid of a lot of stuff. So everything that I moved here fit in my car, in my truck. And when I drove out here, I arrived like late at night and she opens the door and I walk in. I was like, this is huge. This is great. It's like more than enough. So it's so relative based on like where you're coming from, how much stuff you came from. I was already pretty pared down, but I went down even further. But yeah, I think anyone who's even thinking about it, like see if you can stand in the space. Like go find a way that you can. There's tiny home convention, or there used to be at least, who knows. But there were like tiny home gatherings where people would drive their tiny homes or like van life things. And you could go through them and like look at different designs, which I think is an awesome idea to do that in person. Look at all these Instagram accounts, like look at tiny house ideas, go through all the things, like flip through all the photos, see what you like, and start maybe cataloging those in your own folders to say like, oh, I like this idea. If we're going to build our own, what are elements that we want? But I definitely did a lot of research, and that helped me feel very confident stepping into this life. I've also spent a lot of time like in outdoor education and in outdoor, adventure type work. So like the camping aspect of some of the things that have to happen, like not a big deal to have a compost toilet to me. Like I've already worked in places that had compost toilets as like our normal everyday toilet. So, there's certain elements that like were not a big adjustment for me. I don't know if anything was a big adjustment actually. Come to think of it. I was pretty well prepared and excited and eager to get into this lifestyle. So I jumped right in. But yeah, there's so many great YouTube videos of tours. I'm actually about to film a tour of my home, so you can come see my house. But yeah, there's different ways to do it for sure. And if you're at all inclined, like try it on. Why not? Like we only live once, so might as well have a good time.
See what happens.
Yeah, it's worth it.
Well, there's so much more we could speak about, so much more I could ask you about, but I'm sort of conscious of the time. We've been about an hour and 15 minutes now. But there's so much more to say. But I just wanted to give you a massive thank you for coming on and sort of speaking about your experiences in your tiny house, about your journey through life, about your tips and everything. And it's been a pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Harry. This was so fun.
Brilliant. Really enjoyed it. There'll be links to all of the social media accounts, all of Molly's social media accounts, podcast, website, things like that. If everyone wants to check them out, that'll be under the description for the YouTube and Instagram videos. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and thank you so much.
To listen to the full episode of the Tiny House Ideas podcast, head to your favourite podcast streaming platform. It's available on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts. And alternatively, if you'd rather watch the full episode as a video, so the full conversation in a video format, that's only available on Patreon.